Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Tina Brock, your host here for Into the Absurd, a virtually existential dinner conversation. On today's show, Dr. Marcia Ferguson. And we'll get to talking to Dr. Ferguson in just a couple of seconds about all of her work as an actor, as a director, as a multidisciplinary artist, as an educator in the theater department over at the University of Pennsylvania. There is a lot to talk about. If you are coming in on Zoom today, put your questions in the chat box. We'll do our very best to get to them today in our conversation with Marcia. And if you're coming in on Facebook Live, welcome, welcome. And you can always find past episodes of Into the Absurd over on the Idiopathic Ridiculopathy Consortium's YouTube channel. And we have housed, 38, 39, close, somewhere in that vicinity episodes to date since June. And we're going to be here and we'll be going backstage with all of the great works that are going to be happening when we can be back out on the stage with you again in the audience. And when you're there, subscribe. And also on podcast, you can find us Into the Absurd with Tina Brock on iTunes and Spotify. On today's show, Dr. Marcia Ferguson, we have so much to talk about. Our pre-show conversation today, all means and manner of Meredith Monk and Samuel Beckett. So much to dig into. I'm sitting in front of a production photo today of a production of Come and Go by Samuel Beckett that Marcia directed. And I'm going to lean over to show you what this photo actually looks like. And we have that in common. Also had the privilege of directing a production of that. So that's hopefully one of the things we'll get to today. But let's get Dr. Marcia Ferguson to the table and begin this conversation now. Welcome, welcome.
Thanks, Tina. Nice to be here.
I'm so excited. I just want to let those in the audience know that, and many, many thanks to you for being one of the people who helped to launch this show last year. You were here with us on an episode where we were kind of working out the kinks, and you were so generous to give your time. And you had so many things going on in 2020 and now in 2021 that it seemed like, let's get back to the table and talk about the work in the meantime. So thanks so much. We're still here, Marcia. So that test episode was integral in making that happen. Yeah,
it was fun. That was fun.
Yeah,
we talked about Orlando a lot, as I recall, because I was in the middle of that to from live performance to the filmic version of that project.
Yeah, your work at the. There's so much for us to tackle in 50 minutes, but one of the things you sent over to me that I was investigating and has been a long theme in your work is your work with studying with and taking workshops with Meredith Monk. And in 2020, you again stoked your fires by doing that. And I was watching a past interview with her probably a decade or so ago, and it where she talked about this particular workshop was called Dancing Voice, Singing Body. And the interviewer asked her how her practice had changed over the years. And she talked about how when she was younger, she felt like much of her work was just very intuitive, but that over the years, her wisdom now was informing her work with others. And also the work was more intentional and more aware. And so I guess I'd like to, because you have a hand in that directing piece, acting piece, and the educator piece, how your practice has changed over the last year, over the last 10 years, if there's, do you identify with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That starting with intuition and leading hopefully to a little bit of wisdom after decades of practice and teaching and thinking. And Meredith, I want to say is just an extraordinary presence and sort of a touchstone for me. We were talking a little bit about this earlier, but when my well feels dry, and as a teacher, you often kind of feel like you've spilled everything that you've got. You've kind of given everything you have, and I one of the techniques that I figured out for myself early on was, okay, well, I've got to go do some practice. I've got to find either something to direct, an acting thing, or a wonderful workshop, so that I can feel like I've got more to give. So because I can't stop and continue the well runs dry. So Meredith is one of those people, I think, that is the water for me. I go and drink at her well. She's a remarkable presence in the room, a remarkably generous artist. I think, actually, you mentioned it. She helps people be their own best teacher. That's a lovely way to think of it. And just a little anecdote about how we got started, which points to that generosity. I had reviewed, one of the earliest reviews that I wrote for Theater Journal, a production of Magic Frequencies, which was a piece that she created in the mid-'80s, a beautiful piece with so much to it. So I wrote this review, and a few weeks after the piece came out, I had a postcard from Meredith Monk thanking me for the piece and saying, you understood what I was trying to do. It was, your piece really spoke to what I was trying to say. And that was totally thrilling to me. I was completely thrilled and emboldened to go to New York and study with her, thinking, which I don't know why that took courage on my behalf. But the first time I was, I guess because I'm such a fan of her work, but I've since done, 5 or 6 workshops, and I've done dancing, voice, singing, body most recently. And once again, in December, when the pandemic and all kinds of things just sort of left me feeling a bit dry, Meredith Monk was there to inspire me all over again. So yeah, she's really something.
You could feel in this particular clip, it was about a decade ago, she was teaching over in Europe, and the journalist asked her, well, you could see in the room that generosity of spirit, the electricity, you can't hardly describe it without saying this sort of spiritual aliveness that was, and the whole body being used in such an extraordinary present way. One of the questions that this journalist also posed to her was, and I thought it was really interesting for this year, how do you take care of your soul? And she said, well, that she got to this place in her career where she felt she was ahead as an artist, but she was way behind as a person. And so she wanted to balance those two things. And so she started this meditative practice that you talked a little bit about as well in Buddhism. And her teacher told her, you're never going to get it together. And this is the whole class. He was talking to her, the whole group that he was talking to, which actually, she said, gave her a great amount of freedom and understanding. And I wonder, that same question, what do you do to feed your soul? And you answered the question in that you go back to Meredith Monk, but I wonder, because you have your hand in so many different avenues of either being on boards and or helping to facilitate, helping other companies, small companies, helping your students, these projects that you're working on that we'll get to. Is there anything additional?
Oh, well, sure. I think we all have even taking a walk can be rejuvenating and can restore when things get a little dry. That can restore me. Nature. I mean, it's very corny and going back to the romantic poets, but going back and contemplating the sublime. Walking to a lake and looking at birds and so forth and so on. This is a little bit of a divergence, but I've been really enjoying Blanca Ziska's Instagram lately, and it's all of beautiful photography she's taking of nature, of birds, I think artists can need to retreat at times. And for me, that retreat at times feels like the practice end of things. Maybe because I'm in a university setting and I am so invested in teaching, and also the richness of that environment where I'm surrounded by brilliant minds, really tackling the world and the problems of the world in all kinds of ways. And I've been so fortunate to be invited into some conversations about climate change, about positive psychology and human flourishing, the Center for Experimental Ethnography. I mean, there's just so much going on at Penn that theater happens to, there are tiny apertures that theater is often invited into these conversations in different contexts. So, it's
Why do you think that is?
Well, I was just going to say, when I decided to go back, I had an MFA, so I was very much leaning into my practice as an actor at the beginning of things. So went to Temple University, got an MFA right out of college, and I was going to be an actor. That was it, and had a wonderful experience doing that. But soon, as I started teaching, realized that I needed context, I needed history, I needed literature. I was hungry for different kinds of ways in to what was happening on stage. And I think that's a good analogy for what happened to me when I came to Penn 22 years ago now, was I just became, the more I hear about different things going on, I get hungry to engage questions that impact theater from all these different perspectives. And that happens in the classroom as well. I mean, I've been so fortunate with, I just have gotten amazing students who come across my threshold and teach me so much. So that's another way that I get nourished as well,
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to say.
In your work as a director and as an actor, and I'll quote again, Meredith Monk was being asked about, because I think it seems like you have a long history and a lot of shared aesthetic and artistic, and you certainly, look up to her work. She talks about it being very structured, but there being this little pinhole where there is this ability to play,
Mm-hmm.
and that's understood between whoever she's working with, the group that she's working with on stage. How does that figure into your practice? Would you describe yourself as a fairly structured director, then leaving room for play, or?
What a great question. Because it kind of goes to the heart of precisely the way I think of, if I'm thinking about what perhaps is distinctive about my approach. I'm such a firm believer in following instinct, right? So I really try to find ways to invite the people that I'm working with, the folks in the room, to tap into their own inspirations and leanings and impulses. And sometimes that work is extremely abstract, right? So on the bottom of my syllabi for when I'm teaching acting, for example, I really caution people. I'll say, especially if you're new to acting, in an introduction to acting class, for example, I will be asking you to be doing some strange things that perhaps don't make too much sense, but a lot of the understanding of the exercise will be achieved in the doing of them, not in the talking about them, not in the reading about them, but in the doing. So if you're game for that, then you're welcome to my class. If you're not game for that, I understand completely, but perhaps this is not the class for you. So it's that important to me that I actually put that on my syllabus, just because I've learned over the years. And by the way, this willingness to experiment, this willingness to play or to take a flyer, to take a big risk, it's not limited to artistic people. Some of the most wonderful and brave students I've had are from the School of Nursing, or from Wharton, or are engineers. And I'm always delighted to have them in the classroom, because you never know who is really game. And of course, when one person, participates in that juice, everybody else kind of gets on board. Really, it becomes a lingua franca for the class/ensemble. So, but to get to the other part of your question, of course, I have to be organized as a director if I want to, and in the context in which I direct. When I direct professionally, it's a bit of a different story. I really want to be organized in terms of, calendar, and I never want to be late to a rehearsal. Those kinds of sort of basic check boxes. I'm quite observant. But when I'm directing for Penn in a pedagogical context, in other words, I want the people in the production to go away not just with a great experience of getting their hands deep into the guts of a play and of a practice, but also to carry away with them, okay, this play occurred in a certain moment in time, in a certain particular cultural and historical moment in which there was a particular set of political implications to that work. There was a kind of reception that happened, in the audiences and the people that wrote about the production, and also at times, and there are bodies of thought like theorists and critics who have written so intelligently either about the work or the playwright or the movement or some idea that's connected to it that I feel is important. So that takes organization. And I've done it so much at this point, years and years of it, that it comes naturally, but it was something I had to learn as a director. So, yeah.
Speaking of a lot of literature and a lot of language, well-earned being put forward to an author, I'm sitting in front of a production still from a production of Samuel Beckett's Come and Go that you directed. And can you speak a little bit about what that produced for you, what insights as a director working on this work?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Tina, because I loved working on that play. And I know you've worked on that play as well. And I'm sure that we have similar reasons and probably individual reasons for loving working on that play. Just to contextualize it, I did an evening of 4 short plays: Come and Go, which this still is from, Footfalls, Rougher Theater 1, and Catastrophe. So, and each one is so different, but they all, I thought, ultimately worked together. But we were talking a little bit about this, and this is a great example of what I was talking about a bit earlier about what it means to be in sort of an academic context and be writing and thinking about the practice even as you're doing it. I wrote an essay that's coming up recently about touch in theater. And it really did derive largely from my experience directing this play. And as you know, the Beckett estate is very strict about interpretation. And I knew that the very last image of the play, of this particular production, had to be the interweaving of the women's hands, holding hands in a very particular way. Like this one's left hand goes over here and that one's right hand goes over here. And thinking about why Beckett chose that particular position of hands, thinking about, and by the way, I'm not claiming to know, but you have to know temporarily, at least for the purpose of your production. And I'd be interested in what you came up with for that final moment. But the way the women touched each other, the way the hands came together was so significant that on opening night, when I sat back and watched it, I was like, that's why he said it. It wasn't always clear to me in rehearsal, but when I was finally watching it, I was like, that's why he was so specific about the way these women touch each other. And so that planted the seed for this essay that I eventually wound up writing about the importance of touch in theater, and indeed in something that I'm calling theatrical flourishing, which wound up being a part of this positive psychology amazing endeavor that I'm a very small sliver of, but so that's just an example of the kind of interdisciplinarity. So the writing feeds the practice feeds the writing. And the teaching is really a gathering up of the threads of all of that and hoping that somebody gets excited about some of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, Beckett's such a beautiful puzzle that you can have such faith in when you're working on it as a director or as an actor. And again, so well conducted in its specificity, and knowing that you can just trust that form, and then within that allow it to just really live on the stage. I think that's one of the things that's so extraordinary about it. I wanted to sort of jump a little ship here over to a different ship and talk about your work as a composer and the work that you're doing with the Paper Doll Ensemble. I'll go back and just quote Meredith Monk again, because it's such a beautiful quote. She talks about to be part of music is a most magical kind of life, she says, and talks about how she can't imagine a world in which music didn't exist. I watched a clip of some work that you composed for the Paper Doll Ensemble. Can you tell us a little bit about when did you start composing, and what is the work that you're working on now with this theater company in Philadelphia?
Oh, I would love to speak to that. As for the first part of your question, I took a lot of piano growing up. I think 14 years altogether. I studied piano, and there were always little songs going on in my head. I'm sure I'm not unusual in that regard, but always things that melodies and so on. And and I used to sort of hammer them out and try to memorize them and try painstakingly to transcribe them, and I'm terrible at that. So really was when I discovered the voice memo function on my phone and GarageBand, and like, oh my goodness, that was so exciting. I mean,
and how did you use it to sing, or just to compose?
Well, like I have a place to put the melodies. Like I have a place to like hum or poke it out on the,
get it from your brain into
get it from my brain out into the world, and then, and then, and well, in the case of Paper Doll, so that's really when I started doing some, and I composed some piano pieces for a production of a Tina Howe play that I directed at Penn, and that was such a rich way to direct the show and to contribute creatively to it. I was really hooked after that, so I kind of looked for opportunities in different shows since then to help with sound design or with actual melodies. I mean, the production I directed of Everyman in 2019, which, gosh, fall of 2019.
Doesn't it seem like a long time ago?
If you think about it, really, it was a different planet. It's just
like before pandemic, after pandemic.
Before times.
It feels like, yeah.
Exactly. So it was the before times, but a lovely experience with adding music to that show as well. But Paper Dolls is a small feminist theater company, as I'm sure a lot of folks in Philadelphia know, that has done some extraordinary work. Mary Mary was their most recent one, but This Is How Girls Die and some other productions. So I've been privileged to be working on helping generate material for their next production, which they're hoping will go up in 2022. And I've started out helping with devising. I'm doing a bit of facilitating to help generate material now, and have been contributing songs sort of off the cuff as they come to me. And one was an election song, which I wrote around the time of the election. And another one had to do with diet foods, which was it was sort of an outtake. It's something that I composed for Mary Mary, but did not get used. But they did something very clever with it and put it on Facebook or something. So But they're a wonderful group. They're a great example of getting as much as I'm giving, for sure. And I'm very excited about the work that's being generated and the people that are in the room. And it feels like quite a privilege to be there. So that's what's happening now. We're going to start, we've been doing workshops through the summer and the fall and the winter, and we're going to be plunging into some spring workshops with a work in progress showing around June, I think, is the plan. So that's kind of something I'm engaged in at the moment with music. So yeah.
A couple of questions. When you're using your function on your phone, and a little bit like a song comes to you and you just record it on your phone or turn your phone on, and then do you annotate it? Then do you just transcribe it later on?
I transcribe it. I add harmonies.
Interesting.
I can layer stuff on top of it. One thing I'm trying to teach myself at the moment, I play a little bit of fiddle and a tiny bit of guitar, like I'm a faker, with some other instruments, but I am trying to, my son kindly gave me a MIDI keyboard. And so I'm investigating, I'm exploring synthesizers and kind of trying to create a richer sound for some of these compositions. And I'm excited about that. And actually, music is something I would love to take more time with, and I would say Meredith is certainly so inspiring. I mean, I love her music. I think it's amazing. Having done the dancing voice singing body workshop, as well as other ones, you're just immersed in this notion of the voice as movement and the body as voice. And it really, after a while, it really starts to make sense. And I think that's been very inspiring for me, because it also translates into the doing of directing, right? Where we translate text into three-dimensional storytelling, right? And the addition of sound and music, of course. And I know you do amazing sound design yourself, Tina. So I know that's something that you've been very thoughtful about in your practice. I mean, can you trace that to something particular?
Well, not probably dissimilar to your situation. I played piano for many years, and I've always just felt like it's a direct line to big sky, the big world, your big world of your emotions, the world of connectivity in the room with the audience. I mean, I think scoring, I don't compose, so that's, an area where I wish I had gone further, in the study of music, but it's hard for me to imagine a show or directing a show. It's the first place I start, is to listen to all manner and form of music that I think informs, and it won't end up in the final, but it's a way of contextualizing it emotionally and thematically, I think. So I really appreciate that. And I think the silence in Beckett, as we were talking about before, is its own musicality. The move of a pinky is a musical movement, so I that's very exciting that you're exploring that. When you're working with in devising or in helping to facilitate these works for Paper Doll, what does that look like in the room? What is your role? How do you surf in that ocean?
In that ocean, there are so many wonderful techniques, and everything from Laban to viewpoints to Michael Chekhov and psychological gesture to some Lecoq experiments to, I don't know, Viola Spolin. I mean, to all kinds of things that one sort of picks up along the way. And I have to say, I try to find some way of feeling through where I stand with regard to generation of material. I'm not being very clear, but instead of like using specific techniques, sometimes I do, sometimes I feel that's appropriate, but I'll try to pull bits and pieces of all these different, they're all in my tool bag at this point, I guess. And so I will think about, so for paper dolls, for example, we're looking at witchcraft, and we've been doing a lot of dramaturgy and history, witches in history, and burnings, and all kinds of gendered approaches. So there's nothing particular in any of those theorists that is specifically related to this material, but you can get at something I'm trying to get at by, using, maybe I'm being too technical here, but like, flick in Laban, one of the efforts, right? And inviting actors into flicking without saying, okay, we're now going to be doing this Laban technique. I mean, sometimes that's useful, but, and then watching them and letting them suggest their bodies and what's happening with them, will be like, okay. And now we're going to go into thinking about a specific image and finding our way. How will you use what you just did to inform this image? Let's work towards that. And then let's play a game of telephone, and you start something, and then the next person will layer on that, and the next person will layer on top of that, and then watching that, I can say, okay, now all three of you, let's move this onto the floor or what. So that's what it looks like. I mean, it's very in the moment, but it's also, I think, very hard in advance about how we're going to move through a session, because time is short. I mean, we have to be specific, don't we? We don't.
That was my question. Is the getting back to Meredith Monk, is sort of like my best gift that I feel like I can give is to help people learn how to be their own best teacher. But in a situation where you're creating devised work, are you all keepers of the, gee, we panned for gold and we found these nuggets? Are you all sort of looking for that as you're going through it, each person sort of, or is it more to do the experience and to be better for it?
That's a great question, and it goes to the heart of the importance of organization, right? So in this particular show, and with this round, because of the nature of Zoom, for example, we've been doing all of this on Zoom for this particular show for the paper dolls. At this point, they have decided, the founding members, Gracie Hoffman, Sarah Quagliata, and Amanda Jensen, have sort of given everyone distinct roles to play. And sometimes that role is, okay, you watch for the images that work, right? And you will be doing the moving and the sounding, and you guys over here will be doing something else. So that's useful, because we all kind of know what we're doing, and we all know because you can't pay attention to everything in every moment. So it's useful to have some people keeping track and saying, okay, I'm going to write down that image. That seemed to work really well. And then you have a nice image basis from which to draw when you're structuring the piece, if that makes sense. So
yeah, absolutely.
And Meredith, I think, there's a lot to say about the way she works with gestural imagery, and bodily imagery, and starting with something very simple, like you could, she'd say, okay, you need to plant some seeds, right? That's what we're going to start with, this movement of planting something. And we're in a valley, a verdant valley, but it's cold, it's April, and you have a hand tool of your choice from your imagination. And so start with a gesture that is repeatable and meaningful, and it has a purpose and a function. And from that can grow, okay, then that gesture becomes embroidered, or it gets imbued with an emotion, right? And in an actor or a sound or mover that is really connected, something really wonderful and extraordinary can happen that grows from a very purposeful movement, but then grows to encompass the apocalypse, or falling in love, or being at someone's deathbed, or what have you. So that's kind of ideally, that's what it would look like, and the folks that are paying attention to structure and making plots happen and things like that will have their work cut out for them, but also being really paying attention to what is rising up to the surface from this kind of improvisatory work.
It must be exciting to be because largely the work the IRC does, we're not devising work, and I've always had such great admiration for what it takes to have that process, and to be able to watch it, the excitement and the energy and the electricity of this shape forming in the room, and who gets to be who is the keeper of those, that the tracing of that, is such. We talked a little bit. What's that?
Thrill, isn't it? It's a special thrill.
It's fun to talk about it, so I'm always
funny to talk about it. Seems it's overly intentional to talk about it, but I'm the first person to say it should be talked about. I think it's an important.
It's a magical process that's really certainly rewarding to watch. And again, we talked a little bit about having taken some workshops with Pig Iron Theatre Company, and your work at the in London, and how that worked. Can you speak just a little bit about your work in London and how that differs in its structure?
I'd love to. Yeah.
From, say, your work with, Meredith Monk, or the work that you're doing now as a leader or one of the people devising.
Facilitating. Well, first, I would like to speak to Pig Iron, because I learned a lot of this technique from those folks. I learned so much over there. Fabulous people to work with and to learn from and be in a room with. Generous, to an extreme. And also I met some terrific people that actually wound up being important collaborators for me. Mason Rosenthal, I met in Something from Nothing, a workshop years ago now. And Mason is a member of the Lightning Rod Special devising company, which is an extraordinary company. And he and I wound up devising a show together that we wound up taking to Edinburgh, called Ursula Invents Old Woman, which is its own story, because we kind of got into trouble with that one. But
how so?
Well, we loved Ursula Le Guin a lot, and so we kind of built a show around a figure that we thought would come from her imagination of, an older female scientist who encounters an alien, right? So that was sort of the premise of the show. And we did all kinds of things. And it was like, a perfect Fringe Edinburgh hour-long thing. But we worked very hard at it and very long, and got a few decent reviews in Edinburgh, and enough to get the attention of Ms. Le Guin. And apparently she was not happy. So that was that. Was, we were respectively, we were invited to cease and
stop doing your show. How far were you in? How far were you?
Well, luckily we were done. It was
okay.
We sort of thought, well, maybe we can take this back to the States and do something with it. But we ran it about 5 times, and
it made
on our notice, and we were like, okay, I guess
the word got out there.
The word got out, so I took that as a compliment, actually. But
you're planning on going back. You're looking to go in 2022 again, right?
I am looking to go. I'm hope. Yeah,
you shepherd students, right? And you guys do
another Penn ensemble. Yeah, I'm already excited about that, because it's so much fun. It's working with students in that context is such a privilege, and traveling abroad with them is always such an adventure. So I'm really looking forward to that. But just to get back to
London.
Living in London, I was very fortunate to be there for 6 months at one time, and took advantage of my proximity to this school that has an expertise in Lecoq. In fact, Thomas oh my gosh, I'm going to forget his last name, but he was sort of a right-hand man to Jacques Lecoq in Paris and started his own school in London. So I thought, wow, I probably could pick something up there. And it was a 4-week program, very intensive every day, all day, and completely different from Meredith Monk or Pig Iron, in the sense that there was right and wrong, talk about structure. Like half the time you not just me, but everybody, you'd get up and do some work that, that you thought was going to fly. And they'd say, that was rubbish. That was terrible. You have not understood anything. Sit down, and I was like, oh my goodness. Wow. Okay. But I also learned a tremendous amount from what I perceived as this rigidity. But after a while, I started to see, oh, I see why what I just did was rubbish. I get it now, because I didn't really understand the form. And it was very formal. It was, taking Lecoq's prescriptions to a very high level and holding to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, and it was neutral mask, which is very difficult work anyway. So
would you did you have to figure out, or was it sort of, it was on you to understand how to fix the rubbish you had created, or was there?
Oh,
it was on you.
On me. Well,
okay, I mean, so that was the point, was that
I had no excuse, because the teachers were excellent, uniformly excellent. They were tough. They were excellent. And they, every once in a while, they would show, and when you saw someone who really knew what they were doing around this technique, climbing the mountain and crossing the river and realizing this neutral mask, which was experiencing seeing the ocean for the first time, or whatever it was, the kind of propositions that they gave you, proposals. And when you saw someone who did it, who knew what they were really doing, it was like, wow, okay, it's like, watching an orchestra member noodling around on a clarinet, and then, you try to pick it up. So I have great respect for that work, tremendous respect. And I also know I don't have time in my life to go and master that,
Oh, I see.
But, I don't have time for that, but I sure learned a lot, and I appreciated that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure it gives you like everything. It's like learning that, in ballet class, when you're standing at the bar for hours and hours and hours on end doing the same maneuver and the same set of drills. And then you realize later on, yes, okay, I understand now why we did that. I understand why that's, yeah. I want to make sure, a question here to you. When you contribute a song for, say, a paper doll, and then how does it get into the play? Have they asked for it? Do you give them the song and they decide how to use it? How does that work, Marcia?
Well, with paper dolls, they asked for one song at one point, which was the Diet Foods song, which they had done a lot of work on themselves, and they had, they sent me some harmonic proposals and stuff. And so I just sort of refined and added to what they had already done. And that was just a lot of fun to work on. And, but then around the election, I was sort of inspired to, because I think a lot of this company, and I think that they're, the way they grapple with issues of a lot of the issues that were in play around the election. What do you do with oppression and hypocrisy and sexism and racism, and how does that translate artistically, and where are your values around that? And I think Paper Dolls is real clear, and kind of in some ways taking a leadership position on the importance of artists being clear around these questions. So I was inspired by them to contribute a song about the election, and basically the message was, get out and vote, please. but it was through the lens of and plus the image of a paper doll is very, to me, it provoked a lot of thought around what the election was all about and its importance. So I contributed that song. I contributed a song about witches, which is new and is floating around, and who knows if that will be. But I am intending to contribute music for this production. I'm just kind of waiting to see where it lands before I can engage in what that's going to be like. But so that's how it works. I mean, it's nothing formalized, I would say, although at this point it's a bit more formalized because I've been designated
for
work.
You have that hat on.
I have that hat on.
Another area that you are that you've done some really interesting work is with the Unscripted project at and can you give us an entree into that work at the university?
Sure. My role really has been as a supporter of some brilliant students who came up with a great idea. Mira Menon and Philip Chen, who approached me in fall of 2019. That was a busy semester, a lot going on while I was directing Every Man. And I had, in fact, Mira is in the photograph behind you. She was in Come and Go, and she was also dramaturg for the production. And Philip, I met elsewhere. I met him in Cannes at the film festival there, where I was fortunate enough to be. And so we met talking in line, as one waits in line a lot at film festivals. And so we just happened to get acquainted that way. He wasn't in any of my classes or my productions, but the two of them knew each other quite well and came up with this wonderful proposal for bringing improvisatory training to students in underserved schools in Philadelphia. And this became, and they asked me to be their faculty mentor, which I said yes. I was very happy to do that. And essentially they won this extraordinary prize at Penn. It's called the Presidential Engagement Prize. It was a $200,000 grant. And they have done extraordinary things with it. They've, despite the pandemic, which kind of, all the plans that they had laid kind of crashed and burned temporarily, and like for all of us, right? I was going to Edinburgh, suddenly I wasn't. You were going to do some things that didn't happen. I remember, we all kind of were like screeched to a halt. But they never missed a beat. I mean, they adapted everything, all their curriculum to Zoom, to online. They went ahead and got teaching artists involved, and they got they are a nonprofit now. They've gotten that part done. They have impacted, I think they're working now with 6 schools, and 150-ish students have been already impacted by this. And all of the data that we've been able to gather is extremely positive. It's a great program. And these two people are so wise about things I am not wise about, which is the business world. They're both Wharton graduates, and they've just been really carefully laying the groundwork so that this project gains steam and momentum, and the kind of investment it needs to continue its mission and reach more and more and more students, especially the ones that need it most. And honestly, it was so inspiring to watch videos of the work, to hear interviews with the students, grades 6 through 10, who had been so positively impacted by this training, and especially during the pandemic, when so many of them were cut off from their peers, from socialization. They were doing this and not in school, and so the chance to express themselves, to play, to collaborate, to take turns, to listen, to learn really deep listening that you need to do to improvise well together, to take the initiative, to communicate. These are that Philip here would say are key to success in life in general. So
I thought that's what I had remembered hearing. The crux of the project was to work on communication skills, emotional intelligence, and the ways in which. So you referred to the data that came out of that, and do you know how they measured it?
Yes, they are. Well, of course, again, this is a skill set that they have from their.
But anyway, were they measuring like, people self-reporting on emotional intel, like they feel greater connection to people, they feel more connected to their emotions? Do you know how that aspect?
There were surveys distributed to all the students, all the teachers, with specific questions so that they could be sort of
sure, yeah,
across different schools and different students and situations. And so they were able to accumulate a lot of information that way. And they're very careful. And this is one of the reasons it's such a joy to be. I'm now on the board. I'm no longer a faculty mentor, obviously, but it's in good hands because they absolutely know what they're doing. And the data was not just it served the purpose of holding a mirror up to themselves, and are we doing the right thing? Is this working the way we thought it might? Where could we improve? What can go better? And it's just wonderful to see in real time. Like, I'll give you an example. A stutter, right? A stutter was found to be resolved in the course of improvisation. Didn't happen when the student was improvising. Had a profound impact on the life of that individual.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Those kinds
that's extraordinary.
Anecdotes are profound. Yeah. And yeah. So
yeah, Carly Simon was on Finding Your Roots, and she was saying that as a child she was a stutterer, and then when she sang she did not, which is how she started to.
That's cool. Yeah. I didn't know that.
I just heard that yesterday, but
surprising.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah. So it's something that feels great to be a part of, and it was also the first arts project that won that amazing prize, and that prize has done a lot of good in the world. I mean, there've been wells dug in countries where people didn't have easy access to water. There've been some really great other kinds of maybe more science or social science oriented proposals, but this one was the first arts related one. So to win. So it's I hope it's not the last. I mean, I hope it's their demonstrated success will inspire other students of the arts to imagine how they can impact their community.
That's so exciting, though, to understand and be able to really show how arts programs and workshops, exercises, if you change the life of one person, you have exponentially brought, who knows what power to a village, to whatever village we live in, whatever village that person is in. And it's so, we know it because, we see it, we're in the audience, we're creating it, we see other people do it, and it's exciting that it was granted that opportunity to really make the case for and have demonstrable, evidence as to how it can really make a difference.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Really exciting. And I think this virtual medium is something that's really interesting. I just in terms of like connection and the intimacy of it and the way in which it can bring us together, perhaps a year hence now in ways we never imagined it would, and I think that's extraordinary that they, that they just never say stop, they kept going with it. And just, and I was looking over the project, and we'll put the links up there for people to check it out. It looked like there were a lot of lives changed.
I think so. And it's, again, isn't it a privilege to be in an environment where you meet people like that with who have the energy and the ideas, the commitment, and the heart and the compassion to want to do that kind of work in the world.
Sure. Right. Well, but as you said, Marcia, too, you, earlier in the conversation, it's a two-way street, right? You get excited about the work that your colleagues are doing, and it makes you want to, if I interpreted the initial question about, like, I need to be, my fires need to be, my logs need to be stoked too, and so I'm sure your colleagues and all these projects and what you're working on in the environment in which you're working is extraordinary to keeping you engaged and contributing.
Yeah, it is. It's a great situation. Sometimes one can think, oh, I'm doing too many things. Excuse me, I'm doing too many different kinds of things, and I wonder if I'm distracting myself too much, But it just seems to be me. It just seems to be the way I get so excited about something that I can't not think about it and wanna pursue it and do what I can to become involved and contribute in some way. But like you said, like someone like Meredith Monk, that I do need to drink from the well myself so that I can feel like, okay, I do have new things to think about and contribute. And so it's a balance between reaching out and becoming involved in new ideas and new projects and maintaining connectivity with yourself, your own inspiration, what drew you to this world in the first place, what you love about it, and just stay with that too. That seems important as well.
Yeah. To be able to teach yourself, right? And I guess that, as Meredith Monk says, like, my greatest gift I can give you is to figure out how to teach yourself, and that just never stops, right?
Absolutely.
As we move along in the artistic practice, and you have so many hands in so many different pies in that artistic pie. So, well, we are getting up onto the 6 o'clock hour. Marcia, thanks so much for your just the body of work you're creating, the amount of places in which your teaching and expertise is helping others in the community. And I know we first met, I ran across a photograph today of when we directed together some short works for the Irish Heritage Theatre, which is where we first met each other. And I look back on that photograph and it seems like forever ago, and it really was
very special, Tina.
Not very long ago. Yeah.
And getting to know you was really the creme de la creme for me. That was such fun.
Well, me as well. We share so much in common. Beckett, not the least of which those things, and now music and a number of other things. So, well, Dr. Marcia Ferguson, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to the work you're doing with Paper Doll, and we have a lot of conversations to have about Beckett shorts in the future. So
I'm looking forward to them. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks to you and our audience for joining us. Next week, we have sculptor Julia Levitina. I'm going to pronounce that right. And she is from Odessa in the Ukraine, but she's here in Philadelphia, and she has her studio here, and she has her works, both her sketches and her bronze work has been featured in so many galleries here in Philadelphia, around the country and around the world. So I can't wait to dig into her knowledge and her practice of working with bronze as a sculptor next week on Into the Absurd. So join us with your questions. And in the meantime, just wishing everybody a great week ahead. I hope you're getting your vaccine out, getting some sun, keep creating. And I look forward to the time when we can all be back together again in that room. Until then, we hope to see you on Into the Absurd. Have a great week.